Good afternoon to all. If you could please take your seats. A very warm welcome to everyone present, both in the audience and participants to today's event, which is co-hosted by Portugal and the OECD under the theme of Ocean Economy and the Climate Change Nexus. My name is Pedro Solano de Almeida. I am Portugal's Deputy Permanent Representative, and it will be my pleasure to moderate this event. First of all, some housekeeping rules. So the event will last for 2 hours between 2:30 and 4:30. It will be comprised of an opening session followed by 3 thematic sessions and some closing remarks. Each of the thematic sessions will have a panel of speakers and at the end a Q&A. Regarding the Q&A, you are all obviously invited to participate, both people in the room as well as people online. For the people in the room, all I ask is for you to please raise your hand and the microphone will be taken to you. For those of you following us online, participation is also possible, but it will have to be in writing. So please don't hesitate to put your comments and questions in writing. Now, I will, of course, be rigorous in time management. We have a lot of speakers, but if some speakers need to go a little bit over time, which is understanding, then we will shorten a bit the Q&A accordingly, hoping to strike a good balance between presentations and participation. Every session, I will invite the speakers of that session to please sit in the seats here alongside me. And whenever the chance for the opportunity for one to speak, I will ask for the presentation to be made here in the pulpit. As for language, the language of the entire event will be in English. There is no translation available. And finally, this event is a first part of a two-part endeavor, if you will, because after the event, the OECD will produce an outcome paper comprising of the work that has been conducted by the OECD with Portugal, current work, and also the conclusions of this event. So this will be a second part. So we encourage your participation because your comments and your questions will lead to responses that may feed into those documents. And so I would encourage your participation. Now, without further ado, I would move along to the opening sessions and invite to the podium to present her opening remarks, Portugal's Secretary of State for Maritime Affairs, Ms. Lídia Bulcão. You have the floor now.
Good afternoon, Honorable Portuguese Ambassador for OECD, dear OECD representatives, namely the Science and Environment Directors present here, distinguished guests and colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. It is in fact a pleasure to be here and share such an interesting event with OECD, an all-time value and reliable partner in enhancing public policies in Portugal. Over the years, Portugal and OECD have built a solid and productive collaboration, particularly in ocean-related topics, allowing us to build and achieve a leading role in advancing knowledge and policy in this field. Portugal is, above all, a maritime nation. We are responsible for nearly half of the European Union marine waters, being the largest coastal state in the UE. Our geographic and history place the ocean at the core of our national identity, economy, and environmental responsibility. The ocean is one of our greatest assets, offering opportunities for sustainable economic development, but also demanding from us a firm commitment to its protection. Portugal shares the OECD's vision of an ocean economy that is both integrative and forward-looking. A driving ocean economy is not just about industry and economic value, it's about balance. Healthy marine ecosystems generate crucial environmental services, many of which do not go through markets, but are fundamental to human well-being and economic sustainability. Without protecting the natural capital, there can be no long-term economic prosperity in ocean-based industries. Both concepts are related and interdependent. Our government is therefore fully aware that protecting marine ecosystems is not an obstacle to development, but a foundation for a truly sustainable and resilient ocean economy. This is why Portugal has been adopting a comprehensive and cross-sectoral approach to the ocean economy, integrating economic potential with environmental sustainability. Portugal's government is committed to address the ocean climate nexus. We recognize its fundamental role in ensuring ocean health and reinforcing the global resilience to climate change. The impacts of climate change are already reshaping the availability of marine resources and, consequently, the ocean economy. Tackling this challenge requires proactive, science-based policies and decisive action. Portugal is, in fact, taking concrete action to address this nexus, and many of our ongoing initiatives will be presented in this session by the Portuguese institutions. I would like to take this opportunity to acknowledge their effort and thank their participation and engagement in these matters. Among the initiatives in motion, I would highlight the development of Portugal's national plan to combat ocean acidification, a strategic and integrated tool that will guide targeted action to mitigate carbon emission and to better understand the ocean climate integrated system. This plan is being designed with the Ocean Acidification Alliance framework, a robust partnership with relevant government bodies and organizations with whom Portugal is reinforcing international cooperation and leading the engagement on a healthy ocean purpose. In the maritime transport sector, we are actively working on decarbonization, particularly through the proposal for an emission control area in the North Atlantic. This proposal will be presented at the IMO meeting next April, and it is a measure that will significantly reduce emissions from shipping in the region, matching with our broader commitments to climate action. So we are expecting to be approved in the IMO. Portugal is also reinforcing marine research capabilities with the establishment in the Azores archipelago of a climate observatory for the Atlantic, which will enhance our ability to track and manage ocean-based carbon cycles. In parallel, we continue to expand our marine protected areas network, ensuring the preservation of marine biodiversity and the sustainable use of ocean resources. I would like to emphasize here that the largest network of marine protected areas in the North Atlantic was established last October, an initiative led by the regional government of the Azores and approved by the Azorean Parliament. And this marks a significant milestone towards Portugal's national 30 by 30 target, already achieved by the autonomous region, and will have a profound impact on global ocean conservation. These conservation efforts are complemented by a sustainable ocean plans and maritime special planning that seek to harmonize economic activities with environmental protection. Therefore, access to reliable data is fundamental for achieving decision making. Portugal has long been at the forefront at this level in the way that it was the first country creating a satellite ocean account already implemented in the national statistical system. As we move forward, expansion on this tool is needed, not only integrating new data on economic, environmental, and social indicators, but also fostering new opportunities provided by new data-driven solutions so that we can benefit from reinforced account systems and therefore a better policymaking process. In a concluding note, I would like to underline the role of OECD as an essential partner in advancing these discussions. This cooperation, Portugal has benefited greatly from its analytical tools and frameworks, which have helped us refine and improve our policies. And of course, this cooperation is one we wish to keep continue and deepen. By working together, sharing knowledge and promoting evidence-based decision making, we all stand to gain. So let us use this forum to reinforce our collective efforts, ensuring that the ocean remains a pillar of economic prosperity, environmental sustainability, and global cooperation. Together, we can ensure that the ocean continues to be a driving force for economic development, environmental resilience, and international unity. The time to act is now, so let us rise to the challenge with ambition and purpose. I wish you all a pleasant evening.
Thank you so much, Madam Secretary of State, for these important words. I would now invite the Director of Environment of the OECD, Jo Tindall, to please take the podium and present her opening remarks.
Secretary of State Secretary Lydia Bulcao, dear Ambassador Manuel, Pedro, colleagues, I'm really delighted to welcome you all here to this joint seminar with Portugal on the climate change and ocean economy nexus. Well, of course, as you'll all know, we're only a few months away from the third UN Ocean Conference, UNOC, which is going to be hosted jointly by France and Costa Rica in Nice. The OECD has actively contributed to previous gatherings in the series, including one that was held in Portugal back in 2022. And the conference back then delivered a high-level call for action to scale up efforts to meet SDG 14, which was adopted unanimously by all 198 UN countries. 2025 is shaping up to be a pretty pivotal year for ocean action. We've got a number of ongoing international negotiations that are our opportunity to really raise the global ambition for ocean protection. And these include the possible entry into force of the High Seas Treaty, negotiations on fisheries subsidies at the WTO, discussions on a moratorium on deep sea mining in the high seas, and hopefully a conclusion to the process to agree a plastics pollution treaty. So let's first have a quick look at what really is at stake here. The ocean, as we all know, covers more than 2/3 of the Earth's surface. It shapes global climate patterns, sustains biodiversity, and supports the livelihood of millions. I know this personally, coming from New Zealand, which is itself surrounded by ocean, but also from the perspective of our Pacific Island neighbours from New Zealand, for whom the fisheries sector and tourism are absolutely the backbone of all their economies. And they are facing some real challenges, just for example, in terms of fish species migration due to global warming. Now, according to soon-to-be-released OECD data, that's courtesy of our wonderful colleagues in STI, the ocean contributes to around 3.4% of the world's economy and supports over 130 million jobs. It also produces 50% of Earth's oxygen, absorbs 1/3 of global CO2 emissions, and captures 90% of excess heat. At the same time, it is also under immense strain. We've got rising temperatures, ocean acidification, coral bleaching, sea level rise, and deoxygenation, all driven by climate change, and they're weakening marine ecosystems, threatening food security, and putting coastal communities very much at risk. Of course, it's not all bad news. The ocean can also play a powerful role in dealing with climate change. In fact, ocean-based climate actions could reduce global emissions by up to 14 gigatons of CO2 equivalent by 2050. Putting that in perspective, it all adds up to the total CO2 emissions from China in 2022. Our research at OECD identifies several levers that could take advantage of the synergies between climate action, ocean protection, and economic development. These include decarbonising both maritime transport and fisheries, as well as promoting sustainable ocean-based diets, expanding marine protected areas and aquaculture as well to restore biodiversity and boost carbon sequestration, and finally, scaling up ocean-based renewable energy solutions. So today is going to be a real opportunity to zoom in on these linkages and hear more from OECD and Portuguese experts on how the ocean economy can contribute to net zero goals while safeguarding the livelihoods of millions of people. So I wish you all a fruitful discussion. I'm looking forward to the panel sessions and thank you for the opportunity to join with Portugal today to bring this event together.
Thank you so much, Joe, for these powerful words and data, very much the watermark of the OECD. And I would like to invite the panelists for the first session to join me on stage and also to join me in a round of applause for the first two speakers. So we are moving on to the first of the thematic sessions devoted to the ocean economy, climate change, and Portugal. Our speakers will be Claire Joly, Head of Unit Innovation Policies for Space and Ocean of the OECD, Karina Lindberg, Project Leads Policy Coherence for Sustainable Development at the OECD, and Ricardo Segurado, Deputy Director General for the General Directorate for Natural Resources, Safety and Maritime Services, or DGRM. So the first of these presentations will be a joint presentation by Claire Joly and Karina Lindberg. So without further ado, I pass the floor to Claire.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this invitation to contribute to this important event on the ocean economy and climate change. So I'm Claire Joly, and I'm in charge of this program on the ocean economy within the Directorate for Science, Technology and Innovation. I will share here a few insights about the ocean economy in general. And then I'll be followed by my colleague who will tell you a bit more about how we see indeed how we can make the best of, I would say, the ocean economy in view of the complex challenges that we're facing. So the ocean economy is actually not such a new concept. Back in the 16th century, an English gentleman called Sir Walter Raleigh, obviously quite knowledgeable as a sailor of the ocean, actually coined this expression here: whoever commands the sea commands trade. Today, more than 80% of the ocean of trade is actually going through the ocean. What we're seeing here, and went a bit fast, is that indeed the ocean has been already important for a number of countries. Portugal, obviously, quite a few others like the UK. What has changed very much is that many, many more countries these days are actually trying to harness the ocean economy and take their share of major global value chains. At the OECD, we've had for many decades some sectoral work on the ocean. We have a committee on shipbuilding, we have a committee on fisheries, and some 10 years ago, we started to actually look at many different ocean activities as a group. For us, the ocean economy actually has these two main pillars. And trying to then go to the next slide. Whoops. Thank you, my colleagues. So for us, and for measurement purpose, the ocean economy has not only a main pillar on ocean economic activities, it also has another major pillar on the ecosystem services, services that are provided by the marine environment. At this stage, you have different ways of measuring things, but when looking at ocean-based industries in particular, you can measure them through the system of national accounts. And this is where our Portuguese colleagues have been really leading the way. Portugal has been the first country, as the Secretary of State mentioned, to actually really pioneer what we call satellite accounts, providing information on various ocean economic activities. Now we have quite a number of countries doing this particular work. And at the OECD, we've been really working with these countries in terms of putting together guidance. We have a blueprint on measuring the ocean economy that really looks as this particular pillar. The second pillar, in terms of marine ecosystem, is still really in gestation. It's growing. We have more and more countries actually putting together what we call environmental accounts concerning the ocean. but it's still very hard to measure. And the link with science, and there too, our Portuguese colleagues are doing a lot in terms of actually trying to connect the dots between the scientific data we have on the ocean and, I would say, the values, the economic values that we're getting also out of these marine ecosystems. Next slide, please, because I think there's a bit of an issue here with the, thank you. So what we've been doing at the OECD on the ocean economy is indeed putting together this blueprint on how do we measure better the ocean economic activities. Eventually, we want to be able to not only value the importance of the ocean for all economies, but we want also to be able to measure the externalities, the environmental externalities out of these. There are quite a lot of activities within the organization that actually looked at emissions from ships, for instance, but really have also a broader view, looking at all the different sectors. Here you have our definition of what we mean by ocean economic activities. And that has led us to actually put together this program called the OECD Ocean Economy Monitor Program, where we are now at a stage where working closely with our colleagues as part of some of their database on the inter-country input-output databases. That's a very specific activity within SDI. We've been able to actually put together a large ocean economy database where we have a time series for the past 25 years with 33 different ocean economic activities that goes from oil and gas all the way to marine and coastal tourism for more than 100 countries. So that gives a lot of information. If you could go to the next slide. And with this, we are able to actually track the importance of the ocean economy for countries. And one of our key findings here is that it's actually very important. As Joe mentioned, indeed, we found that in 2019, so that was just pre-COVID, the ocean economy represented around 3.4% of the global economy. You may think, well, it's tiny, but not really when you actually imagine that if the ocean economy, and again, here we're just talking about ocean economic activities, if it were a country, it would be the 5th largest economy in the world in global value added. So that's quite important. Do you realize all the policy implications in terms of actually managing this huge, I would say, economy? Now, again, the estimates do not even account yet for marine ecosystems. The plan is to really work closely with countries, including, again, our good colleagues from Portugal, in order to refine these elements, marine ecosystem services. That's going to be very important, I would say, in the next years to come, as we indeed want to provide evidence to support climate change action in particular. What I can tell you is that we see the ocean economy still growing under certain assumptions, but there are many, many hurdles along the way, many problems to come. We are putting together right now a report called the Ocean Economy to 2050, which will be released in March, where we do provide a number of options for policymakers. And one important factor here is that in order to harness better this growing ocean economy, you need to have the policy frameworks in place for ocean governance, for ocean management, marine spatial planning. You need more policy coherence across countries and in countries themselves. And that's where we have very interesting work going on in the OECD. And I was very happy to partner with our colleagues from Gov for a specific project with Portugal on this aspect. So if Karina could continue the rest of the presentation. I told you about ocean economy data, that we really need to be able to actually put all this together in terms of policy coherence.
Thank you very much, Claire. So please, Karina, if you could please take the podium.
Thank you, Claire, and thank you, Pedro. My name is Karina, and I work in the OECD Public Governance Directorate, where I oversee the implementation of country projects on policy coherence for sustainable development. So today, in the limited time we have, I just want to give a brief snapshot of the work we do and how it can be applied to the context of the ocean economy. So I want to make just 3 overall points. The first one, policy coherence for sustainable development, or PCSD, contributes to integrated policymaking and implementation. And this is important, but it's also important to outline what we mean by policy coherence for sustainable development. It's a very broad concept that might need some unpacking. And that's why we are using these concepts to explain it. And that is to balance the economic, social, and environmental priorities across to ensure the well-being of the present generation in one particular country here and now. So that would be in Portugal today, by that analogy, to make informed choices about sustainable development, considering the effects of today's policy decisions on the well-being of future generations. So your children and grandchildren, and then some, to consider how domestic policies affect negatively or positively the well-being of people living in other countries, be they neighbors to Portugal or in other parts of the world, given the global nature of the ocean. And so to consider these three different aspects can help governments to develop policies that more integrate across the different dimensions of the economic, social, and environmental pillars of sustainable development. And that brings me to my second point, and that is that the Sustainable Development Goals can help to provide a framework for identify policy interactions and spillovers in ocean management. First of all, governments need to understand sector dynamics. So that includes, in the case of the ocean, shipping, fishing, tourism, aquaculture, to name a few. They also need to look at the resources and possible conflicts that underpin these businesses, such as coastal areas, open waters, and waterways. And then to my third point is precisely this, that in order to examine the interdependencies and synergies, governments can avail of the SDGs and the framework they provide for detecting these interlinkages, be they costly trade-offs or synergies that we should seize and optimize to foster policy coherence for sustainable development. And then, of course, governments need to evaluate the impact of external factors, economic trends, indeed climate change, which is the focus of today's seminar, and to see how those external factors impact on the first three pillars that I mentioned here: sector dynamics, resources and conflicts, and the interdependencies and synergies. Lastly, with all that in mind, they need to develop policies and strategies that consider all of these things to ensure coherence, and that the policies in one area does not conflict with the policy in another area, be it within the ocean economy itself or between the ocean economy and social or economic areas of activity outside of the ocean economy. And this is not easy, but to facilitate this process and guide countries, the OECD has a recommendation on policy coherence for sustainable development, which can guide governments in these efforts. And this recommendation, adopted by all members in 2019, provides governments with a standard to comprehensively address the policy interlinkages and impacts of the policies that they have, both at home and internationally. And it's based on these three pillars that you see here. So strategic vision and leadership, effective and inclusive governance mechanisms for policy interactions. So that refers both to horizontal coherence across sectors and government agencies, but also vertically, so national, subnational, global level of policymaking. And lastly, they need a set of responsive tools to anticipate, assess, and address the impacts of policies. And these, of course, this is not a one-size-fits-all. These are enablers, 8 enablers that we've identified for policy coherence. And then, of course, depending on countries' different contexts, needs, and priorities, the mechanisms that they put in place will look different from country to country. And we've just recently, as Claire said, applied this framework and these analytical concept to the case of Portugal and the ocean economy there. So, and we also have a report coming out at the end of this month that explains this in much more detail. And we may also have the opportunity to discuss some of the findings in the session. But for now, I will conclude here and leave the floor to our next speaker. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Claire and Karina, for this very interesting joint presentation. And I would now ask Ricardo Segurado from the DGRM to please take the podium.
Thank you very much. Dear Secretary of State of Maritime Affairs, Lídia Belclão, dear Ambassador of Portugal on OECD, Manuel Lobantunes, I extend my compliments to all the Portuguese staff here at the OECD, dear representatives from OECD, Excellencies, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. Why Portugal? Why in Portugal? We saw and we talk that the sea is our growl to DGRM, our purpose, our motivation. That's why, because as you may know, about 71% of the Earth's surface is covered by the ocean, with some of almost over 90% of the planet's living species, from plants and fish to reptiles and mammals. Portugal is the European Union's largest coastal state, holding jurisdiction over approximately half of the EU's marine waters and the vast expanses of seabed and subsoil in the Northeast Atlantic, around 4 million square kilometers, 40 times greater than the land area. Note that by saying Portugal's maritime dimension, we are referring to its territorial waters, contiguous zone, exclusive economic zone, and its continental shelf. And this is last zone, the continental shelf, Portugal, as a coastal state, exercises sovereign and exclusive rights for the purpose of exploring and exploiting its natural resources. So, the country plays a focal role in advancing ocean sustainability and governance, both within the EU and globally. What is the Marine Strategy Framework Directive? As a member state of EU, Portuguese marine waters are an integral part of the Northeast Atlantic Marine Region, sub-regions of the Bay of Biscay and the Iberian Coast and Macaronesia, according to Article 4 of the Marine Strategy Framework Directive. EU adopted the MSFD to maintain clean, healthy, productive and resilient marine ecosystems while securing a more sustainable use of marine resources. This directive directly contributes to the mission of the European Green Deal, namely the EU's biodiversity strategy for 2030 and the Zero Pollution Action Plan. So at the national level, for the elaboration and implementation of marine strategies, 4 subdivisions were defined, namely mainland, Azores, Madeira, and extended continental shelf. What is MSFD Lighthouse? The Marine Strategy Framework Directive, by framing a set of other legal instruments in the EU, works for the bodies responsible for those legal instruments as an inspiration, indicating paths that must be followed to achieve and maintain the good environmental status of the marine environment. The Water Framework Directive, the Natura Network in the marine environment, the Common Fisheries Policy, food security, legislation to combat invasive species, and policies to protect coastal areas as example of this. In this way, DGRM, as the entity responsible for implementing the MSFD, cooperates and has an important influence on other environmental policies overseen by other spheres of government, especially those for the environment, playing a relevant role in sustainable economic development and can serve as a case study for organizations such as the OECD. As you can see, the importance of the governance and marine conservation results that the Portuguese maritime territory includes the maritime inland waters, the territorial sea, the contiguous zone, the exclusive economic zone, and the continental shelf. Because of this, DGRM is responsible, together with the national authority, for the management of the protected marine areas on the seabed and subsoil and in the water column and surface beyond the territorial sea from 12 miles to 200 nautical miles. What is our scope of responsibility? DGRM is the national authority for marine fisheries and aquaculture. DGRM is national maritime administration and is also national entity for marine sustainability and maritime planning, responsible to ensure national representation in various fora and working bodies such as IMO and European Union, responsible to implementation of national and EU policies, responsible for implementation of EU and international and regional legal instruments, international cooperation in third countries, including Community of Portuguese language countries, and preservation of natural resource and maritime safety. Because of all of this, the sea is heart of the DGRM, and our action includes responsibilities in several dimensions, like maritime administration, fisheries, spatial planning and sustainability, regulation, control, enforcement, and among others. DGRM OECD study. Why does this mean? What does this mean? A development for a strategy, plan of decarbonization, digitalization, and sustainable blue economy in the sector of port maritime, fisheries, maritime spatial planning, and marine sustainability. The background is that the results, our national ocean strategy 2021-2030 is in phase of transformation in ocean-related public policies. The DGRM 3 core areas of action align with global trends towards sustainability, digitalization, and economic resilience in the maritime sector. There are 3 challenging areas for improvement that requires the adoption of new ways to approach to being them about the DGRM 3 core areas of action: employment and circular and sustainable blue economy, decarbonization, renewable energies and energy autonomy, and last, reindustrialization, production capacity, and ocean digitalization. The needed actions identify and provide tools and strategy and instruments to efficiently respond to this challenge, and development of strategy plan which allow the DGRM to identify a set of actions of implement. The study aims to identify recommendations from the development of a strategy plan on the most appropriate governance structure for DGRM, which strengthen the achievement of the mentioned rational objectives for the maritime port and fisheries sectors, maritime spatial planning, as well for the good environmental status of marine ecosystems. The action was founded by the European Union via the technical support instrument and implemented by OECD in cooperation with the Director General for Structural Reform Support of the European Commission. In a global world, the study highlights the importance of cooperation with leading institutions as OECD, due to their technical, scientific, and global rigor for informed decision makers. This work results on a productive joint effort between the OECD, the European Commission, and Portuguese stakeholders. The project has been shaped by an inclusive process with continuous involvement of government and non-government stakeholders over the course of 24 months, involving the set of a focus group and development of workshops, interviews, and case studies, which will ensure actionable and evidence-based recommendations. The analysis is based on the analytical framework provided by the OECD, recommendation on policy currents of sustainability and development, to evaluate DGRM's capacity and operations, with the view of additionally identify policy interlinkage across Portugal maritime sectors. The report assesses current capacities, process, mandates, and coordination mechanisms for DGRM and other relevant entities. It also analyzes interlinking challenges and opportunities, with case studies or pilots chosen by DGRM on aquaculture located offshore and in transitional waters, marine spatial planning issues, and the focus on Portugal experience as a flag state. The study sets out a roadmap for DGRM and Portugal to leverage the ocean economy in the ways that foster sustainability use of national and international marine resources. The recommendations aim to enhance policy curves for sustainability development towards 2030 and beyond. Of course, Portugal is also implementing another areas and another issues. One of them is implementing a work program to update information in the Ocean Economic Satellite account and adapt this tool to the current demands of the European economy. The ongoing conceptual framework follows the OECD recommendations and including the economy dimension of activities carried out of the sea, the dimension related to measuring natural marine resources and ecosystem service. This step will enable a better measurement of the ocean economy and improve international compatibility. At the end, this is a win-win approach where partnership between states and organizations benefits from one another. OECD and DGRM cooperation is an excellent example of an outstanding partnership. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Ricardo, for this impressive data and ongoing work. This will conclude the presentations of the first session. We're a little behind schedule, so that's on me, but we still have time for a couple of questions. I would remind everyone that anyone can take the floor. In the room, just raise your hand and a microphone will be given to you. While taking the microphone, I would ask for you to briefly introduce yourselves and to direct your questions to one or more of the speakers that you wish to respond. So having that said, who is the brave soul that will break the ice? We have two people already, Ana Paula Fernandes from the DCD, a colleague at the OECD. Please.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon to everyone. So I work in the Development Cooperation Directorate, and there is one dimension of this PCSD and blue economy that is very important, which is also the work that Portugal has been doing with Cape Verde, for instance, on blue economy and on blue transition. So I wanted to ask you how much of that dimension was taken into consideration in the project, because it has been a very good experience in terms of the results that that project has. In the DCD work, we have been also developing a new guidance on biodiversity, and that guidance also includes some parts on oceans and blue economy, and that will be some good, I think, recommendations coming in on that. And finally, Karina, you mentioned also the policy coherence dimension. I think it would be also very interesting to hear from you about, the whole system, how this relates with also the community of Portuguese-speaking countries that was mentioned also as a partner on this strategy that Portugal just presented. So thank you so much for the insights, for the presentations, and happy to hear from you.
Thank you so much, Ana Paula. Which one would be most happy to take the floor to answer, Ana Paula?
Thank you so much, Anna. If I understood your question, it was about the role of development cooperation and to what extent we've looked at that angle in the project. It wasn't the focus of the project, but of course you can't discuss the ocean without looking at the international relations between countries, including the finance flows and migration and so forth. So the way that comes into the project perhaps was when one of the key elements of our work is on transboundary impacts and how policies in Portugal on the ocean, but also in other areas, Portugal's agriculture, for example, impacts the ocean and hence on other countries. And then the rationale then for policy coherence that started 10, 20 years ago is precisely that, to ensure that Portugal and other countries' domestic policies do not impact negatively on other countries in other areas of the world, including Portuguese-speaking communities. But again, it wasn't something we looked at specifically, but it would be an interesting topic to perhaps explore together in the future, so we can discuss that together. Thank you.
Thank you very much. First of all, this study is a very interesting tool, and DGRMs have to learn something with this study, because we participate since the first minute along these 24 months, and the conclusions are very interesting. Sometimes we must be something from outside to write the ones that we think, but we don't have the need or the clue to write it down. So with this tool, I think we have some steps to improve ourselves, to look to our house, the GRM. And like I said at the beginning, the sea is our main action at the GRM. And this study makes some interesting cues and interesting ideas to how can the GRM look to the sea. And that's our proposal now at this time, at the end of the study with the conclusions. We have to look down to the conclusions and see the forward steps. Thank you.
So maybe just one word about the finance. And I know you're putting together right now a very interesting report with guidance for development partners. That's going to be very exciting. But at the end of the day, I think indeed we have some very good examples also coming from Portugal. You mentioned Cape Verde. I know that there's been a projects in terms of indeed transferring some of the knowledge on statistical thematic accounts for the ocean to Cape Verde and other places in order to indeed adapt the methodologies and making sure that at the end of the day, and this is really a key work of the OECD, we get to comparable data across countries over time. And that includes OECD countries, but also many developing countries. So looking forward to see the guidance published. It's going to be a very nice output coming out of the OECD for the UN Ocean Conference.
Thank you so much. Very happy to have heard all three speakers on the question. And I would like to ask the gentleman that also asked the floor to pose the question that he would like to pose, just to ask for the most possible brief responses, because we're running a bit late already.
Yes, thank you. Good afternoon. I'm Luca De Micheli from the Italian Permanent Delegation. I wanted to make a longer introduction, but I will cut it to save some time. The title of this session is also includes climate change, which has not been really touched. So the question is, does the Portuguese strategy also include risk assessments? For instance, what I never hear in the various strategies, if I were a government from a country with a coastal area in the North Atlantic, not just Portugal, I would be really concerned on what is going to happen if the Gulf Stream collapses. So all scenarios state that we will have a collapse in the business as usual scenario between now, 2025 to 2100. So is Portugal getting to be prepared in this case?
Grazie, Luca. And I think the answer is the answer should be
Thank you very much. That's a difficult question, and responsive to that, it is more difficult. But I think that the government here present, the administrative public service like DGRM and the others for responsibilities at the sea, they are making their job. They are making the legal areas, the legal directions to protect the ocean. Of course, the protection of the ocean, the protection of marine life, the protection compatibility for marine life to the other uses of the marine and the sea, of course, it's the big challenge to all of us. But at our scale, in a big scale of the sea, but our scale as a country, we are making our job. And we hope that in the future, we don't have to look back and see that we have failed. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And that wraps up the session one. So I would ask a round of applause for our speakers. Thank you so much. Moving on to session two under the theme Nature-Based Solutions in the Context of Climate Action, Ocean Nexus, I would invite to the stage Michael Mullen, economist with the OECD, José Guerreiro, president of IPMA, the Portuguese Institute for Sea and Atmosphere, and Rui Martins, the regional director of marine policies in Azores Autonomous Region Government, who just flew in from Azores. To introduce the session, the first speaker will be Michael Mullen. So I would invite Michael to please take the podium.
Hello, good afternoon, boa tarde. It's really a great pleasure to be with you here today at this seminar on the Ocean Economy and Climate Change Nexus. And today, I'm going to focus my intervention really on the challenges with mobilizing investment for nature-based solutions to help address coastal risks. So to start with some broader context, or slides permitting. Okay, great. So I think as an overall context, we have a big investment gap for adaptation to all risks, not just coastal risks, rising damages, systemic impacts, and yet, for example, only 2% of infrastructure investment meet standards of climate resilience. So really, it's something that needs to become standard practice. At the moment is somewhat exceptional practice. And of course, we're facing rising risks from climate change in coastal areas. you'll be familiar with sea level rise, storms, acidification. Something I want to emphasize, though, is the risks are not just about climate change. The risks are about the combination of climate hazards plus these broader pressures on coastal areas, including water pollution, subsidence, etc. And there's really, and what that comes to is if we want to manage those risks, we need to take a broader, more integrated approach, which I think speaks very much to the intervention we had in the previous session. What this comes to is risks to people, to ecosystems, to the economy. For example, I believe in Portugal, it's around 13% of GDP depends upon tourism, and visiting the beaches is an important motivation for many of those tourists to travel there. And so in that sense, taking action to manage those risks is a fundamental part of the response to climate change. And something I'd like to focus on particularly is on the potential contribution of nature-based solutions. So you see the definition here from previous OECD work about protecting, sustainably managing, or restoring nature to address a variety of social, environmental, economic challenges. I think to simplify, I like to put it in terms of it's really about working with nature rather than trying to fight against it. So for example, restoring dunes rather than building concrete seawalls. And I think there's a range of benefits of doing so. It can be more flexible, it can be more cost effective, you can get co-benefits, both in terms of amenity value and for biodiversity. And there's a wide range of measures that you can use with suitable for different contexts. I believe this photo is from the dunes near Cascais, but I will let the Portuguese colleagues confirm if that is indeed the case. So there's a huge potential, but what we're seeing is a set of interconnected barriers to implementation. And the issue is that although, if you want to protect against storm surges, you can use nature-based solutions, you can use conventional infrastructure, the two are not the same. They have different characteristics, they work in different ways, and they have different prerequisites if you want it to become effective and sustainable. In terms of the technical side, the capacity side, you need the combination of engineering and ecological expertise. In terms of the financial side, if you think of a lot of these benefits, the amenity value, the benefits to fisheries, these are real benefits to people in society, but at the same time, they don't necessarily translate into revenue streams that can pay for the intervention. And thirdly, and I think this has been alluded to a bit already, you have these institutional issues, which is that, again, you're talking about action across different layers of government, different areas of responsibility, local authorities, maritime, tourism. And in that sense, getting that coherent approach becomes fundamental to the whole exercise. Now, at OECD, we've identified 6 key elements that can help unlock investment in adaptation and in coastal NBS specifically. Firstly, having clear strategic planning. Secondly, regulatory alignment. Thirdly, looking at insurance and risk transfer, helping to get the benefits of resilience and translating that into revenue streams. Public finance investment. Are budgeting decisions, is public spending, does it consider the benefits of resilience? Sustainable finance, I think we're starting to see some interesting initiatives with green bonds and blue bonds and so on. How can we exploit that potential to get more money flowing into this area? And last but not least, support and incentives for private investment. A lot of the initiatives that I'm aware of, at least in Portugal, it's all public money. A lot of European support, some domestic resources. And so there's a huge untapped potential for private money. And we're starting to see a few pilot schemes, mainly in developing countries. And I think for me, this is a huge untapped potential. And so just to wrap up my intervention, to say that at COP29 last year, so the UN Climate Change Conference, DSG Goodman launched the OECD's Climate Adaptation Investment Framework, which is a joint product between the Environment Directorate and the Director for Financial and Enterprise Affairs. And basically, this aims to provide governments with an integrated toolkit that brings together these 6 areas to provide non-prescriptive guidance on how to strengthen the policy environment to see the kind of investment that we need. So for each building block, it looks at international good practice, identifies guiding questions, and signposts to future resources. So in conclusion, I think coastal NBS is an important part of the solution to the challenges faced by coastal areas in Portugal and elsewhere due to climate change. If we want to unlock this potential, there's a need for a clear and coherent policy environment. We hope that the climate adaptation investment framework can help contribute to the development of such things and are at your disposal to discuss further. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michael. And I think you're right. That beach sounded very much like a beach in Cascais called Praia do Guincho. It's one of the many lovely beaches we have in Portugal. If you haven't been there, please do so. Now, the next speaker on my list is the president of IPA, José Guerreiro, who I invite to take the podium. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, Madam Secretary of State, Director Joe Tyndall, Director Jerry Sheehan, Ambassador, and all the Portuguese members of the Portuguese delegation, distinguished guests. It's both a pleasure and an honor to be here today. Well, I'm a little bit old and I've assisted to several evolutions regarding nature, conservation, and climate change. Actually, sometimes we forget that we are assisting to a shift. The 20th century was the century for nature conservation. Now we are facing nature restoration, which is quite a little bit different. Nature restoration also led to what we are discussing in this panel, which is nature-based solutions. They are a little bit different nowadays because we are used to nature restoration as restoring seagrasses, salt marshes, mangroves, and so on. I did so 20 years ago. But the challenge now is a new one. The question is for instance, renewable offshore energy or aquaculture or marine protected areas part of this process? That's what I will try to demonstrate. Actually, these new approaches have new challenges. The first one, of course, is financial one. The second one is technical, methodological. But there are also opportunities. Actually, on new technology, new technological solutions, sustainable solutions, as my predecessor said, nature-based and working with nature. Sometimes the solutions are there for centuries. We just don't see them. But also an opportunity to strengthen partnerships between stakeholders, government, industries, communities. And that's where we enter. Actually, the Portuguese Institute for Sea and Atmosphere is the state laboratory precisely for ocean and atmosphere. We have been developing a strategic plan for ocean and atmosphere 25-28. And several of the pillars match this main goal. This is precisely what I am presenting today. 3 of the pillars of this strategic plan, which are based on offshore energy systems, on aquaculture, marine protected areas, and associated with this, the good environmental status and the accounting the goods and services of ecosystems. The first one, as you know, renewable energies, particularly offshore renewable energies, are state of the art. And particularly in our case, floating processes and floating facilities. Actually, this is one of the main projects that Portugal, and particularly the Institute, is leading with. It's no little task. Actually, we have been developing with the funding of 42 million euros, a little job which is to map geophysical and geotechnological the bottom of the ocean corresponding to 2,000 square kilometers. This is the good and the nightmare of having such an ocean. The first leg of this ocean mission was accomplished in our research vessel, Mário Ruivo, one of the longest oceanographic missions ever accomplished, 42 days at the sea with a multinational team. from America to England, France, Italy, Spain, because one of the questions is international cooperation to develop such solutions. So we'll accomplish this mapping in the end of this year. We hope so. But this is precisely one of the shifts that we are facing, which is to use the energy that always been there to produce and contribute to decarbonization. The second process, this is a view of the only facility that we have in Portugal, which contributes for another shift, another change of paradigm. We are no longer fishing the sea. We are trying to farming the sea. And this is a world of difference. Actually, what we are been doing in nature-based solution in aquaculture is a little bit different from the intensive aquaculture that some of you are well known, and it has also its problems, environmental problems. What I bring you today, this facility is the only pre-industrial facility that we have in Portugal, 260 pounds. We have 7 hectares, but I have chosen 2 particular projects, not by chance, Interreg funded projects. The first one, ASEA for Rice, it's for the Euro-Mediterranean regions. 8 countries involved, 14 other countries associated. Again, for a particular region in Europe, what we are trying to develop, it's a new technologies, environmental sound, not only multi-trophic, but also recycling aquaculture systems, and also trying to develop biofloc methodologies. And this is quite important, this project. Why? Because it's focused on coastal areas, coastal lagoons and estuaries. Because the question sometimes when we talk about aquaculture, nowadays we are focusing in offshore aquacultures. But most of these projects are not for local communities. These ones can be for local communities. The second project, also an Interreg, not for Euro-Mediterranean area, but for the Atlantic area, also 8 partners. And this project addresses one of the questions that we have in the Atlantic area, the bycatch and the sub-products precisely of aquaculture. This is where Blue Biotech enters. What we are trying to develop is precisely not only how to add value to these byproducts that usually were waste, they are no longer waste. They are raw materials, and these raw materials need Blue Biotech to be transformed and to be put it in the market. But also a new model of business for this is needed, and also new marketing techniques are needed. So these are the 3 components of this program. Finally, or almost finally, we have this huge task ahead of us, fortunately, together with the autonomous government of, Açores and Madeira, which is to accomplish the 30 by 30 goal and complete the national network for marine protected areas. We have already accomplished the first part. We need to develop with the precious help of the government of Açores. My colleague will speak much better than me about that, but we have to accomplish that goal. For that, we need to map habitats, biodiversity, critical ecosystems, and so on. This is the task that we must accomplish by 2027 at the Institute. We've already done it in the Madeira region, at least partly. But part of this is also to maintain the good environmental status of the ocean. For the first time, we have a dedicated program for the Marine Strategy Framework Directive initiating this third cycle. We have already developed the first oceanographic missions together with the Navy. And again, it's very important to have partners. And we are working together with the Portuguese Navy and also with the cooperation for the colleagues, for instance, from Norway, from France and England and other countries that we are cooperating with. This is quite important to have good and sound data of the environmental status of the ocean. That's what we are doing. This is a new program, 2.5 million euros dedicated to the Marine Strategy Framework Directive. And finally, how to account this? Well, actually, it means collaborating in the development of methodology to include the analysis of natural capital and service of marine ecosystems in national accounts. This is in accordance with the system of economic accounts for the environment of the United Nations and in close cooperation with the National Statistic Institute. We are developing that. Finally, this is an insight of our last campaign. It has a video. I won't bother with that, but this is the kind of work that we are doing at our institute with the new science and technology that we have. Indeed, the idea behind nature-based solution is one encapsulated in the twofold notion of protection and prosperity. One can surely wonder if this win-win paradigm is attainable. That's our mission here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, José Guerreiro, for this very interesting presentation of what is going on in Portugal regarding nature-based solutions. Now I would invite our next speaker, Rui Martins, the Regional Director of Marine Policies in Azores. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Honorable Portuguese Ambassador at the OECD, Honorable Secretary of State for Maritime Affairs, Honorable OECD Directors, also my dear panel colleagues and Pedro, distinguished guests, dear attendees. My presentation would undertake like two aspects. One, it's on the technical and scientific challenges that support the maritime protected areas, and the other one is the political aspect of it. So, so here, Portugal, and as you can see, Portugal, it is sea. We start, the Portugal EEZ is above 1.7 million square kilometers, and the Azores, it's about 1 million of those. And if we take to account the extended continental shelf proposal, that would be an extra 2.4 million square kilometers. So we're talking about roughly 4 million square kilometers. So it is a lot of sea to see and watch and actually take care. And so obviously we do embrace the Portuguese government, the regional governments, we embrace the Sustainable Development Goals, also the KMGBF framework, also the European Strategy for Biodiversity, the National Strategy for the Sea, and also the MSFD, like José Guerreiro was talking about, and DGRM also spoke, which is a very important directive and actually kind of leads us in the aspect of the science that needs to be produced to fulfill this need to describe the good ocean quality and the good environmental state. So, and this, the aim, it's actually in 40 Azores, the aim, it is to protect, promote, and to value the natural capital that we have in these islands. But however, deep sea exploration, it's very challenging and it is expensive. So the deep sea floor is vast and it is little explored. It relies on cutting edge technologies that tend to be quite expensive, and also the research vessels that actually there's not an abundance of them. And so the sea days that we are able to book are also few. And also, there aren't that many research groups, and or at least that have the financial ability to, you know, to book these days at sea and to make. Oops, sorry. Okay, so I can go back because I would like to present you so also, and going along with the UN Decade for Ocean Science, which aims to reduce inequality in research capacity. In the Azores, we actually developed, well, the University of the Azores and the Azores Deep Sea Research Team developed a low-cost camera, which is the Azore Drift Cam, which allowed us to have an effective and rapid, you know, appraisal of deep sea benthic habitats. There was a video. I don't know. I thought it would go straight, but anyway. So the idea was to make it available, you know, with off-the-shelf market tools that you can get, like cameras, and so. But it's very user-friendly, and you can deploy it from small platforms. And so with this camera, what we actually saw, okay, there's a video, doesn't matter. That's the archipelago. It's one of the research vessels of the Azores. But so what this allowed us was to, as you could see, the red line is the one that states where the Azore Drift Cam was developed. And as you can see, there was a lot more dives led by non-locals, which was, you know, the Eurofleets or the Ifremer, avec le pourquoi pas, they were always, you know, around. And so there was a lot of more dives led by non-locals. But after we developed the Azore Drift Cam, you can see that the dives were actually, there was a lot more that were performed by local divers. And you can see also that's the number of deep sea dives that were done within the Azorean sub-area of the Portuguese EEZ. And as you can see, there was like a big increase, and 91% of those were led by, or they were done with using the Azorean Drift Cam, which made the Azores the global hotspot for equitable deep sea exploration from 2015 to 2024. And as you can see, there was like 1,500 dives, and which was assessment of the bottom of the sea. And that position is very well among the world, you know, the capability of going to underwater. And so here, I'm gonna just show just a few, like few highlights of what we discovered just recently, just last year. So we had like dense gardens of bubblegum coral, which were at depths in between 600 to 800 meters. And this actually provides habitat for commercial valuable species among them, which for us, it's very important because it's a way of balancing an extractive activity and also protecting the environment. So it is necessary to know what we have. And so therefore, we can develop policies to protect them and to make this sustainable. Also, another highlight is we did discover extensive gardens of Gorgonian corals, which represent the highest density of cold water corals in the Azores. And also, to bring the technology needs that we have, we do think that artificial intelligence algorithms will be, well, they will be necessary probably, and they will be a very helpful, you know, in order to analyze these images and all these species that we have. And also, yeah, we also discovered large aggregations of black corals. And why is this important? Because it is a very slow growth rate species or a coral, and can live like for several thousand years. And the ones that we found actually are equivalent to the redwood forests, the oldest trees that persist on the planet. So it was also a very important achievement. Also, and I think this is the last example, but banks and seamounts that were heavily exploited by bottom longline fishing are still home to deep sea benthic communities with a high natural and ecological value, which means that there is a need, well, there has been a need, and it's an ongoing need of regulating deep sea fishing practices, but it is important to also know that some of these areas that were heavily exploited, that we know that historically have been, actually still have this ecological values, which means that the practices being artisanal actually are able to coexist. And so this is what we did just in 2024, well, up to 2024, well, these last couple of years. We visit all the 140 structures that go up to 1,000 meters deep with using this camera. So we have there's the data there. We got 350 days at sea. We got more than 2,000 hours of video footage. There's a lot of records. I didn't put everything here, but there was new species that were discovered, still need to be assessed and actually, given a name. And as you can see, there's the use of several ways of investigating the deep sea. But as you can see, the deep sea, the drift cam, it was most of it. It's the black dots, but we also have HOVs, ROVs, and also the tow cams. And now going to the political part of how to, develop a marine protected area. So one of the biggest challenges, obviously, and I think was the main achievement, was the stakeholder engagement. It was a long process. It was about almost 2 years, 19 months. There was a lot of meeting, also with all the sectors of activity, maritime, touristic, also the fisheries, and also just citizens that, they have the, for that go and fish that are not really, they're not association or nothing, but they actually were engaged and they were users of the sea. And so it was a very important process. And that process actually led us to that dream, which you can hear announcing or not. Fortunately, it was not too loud, but yeah, it was loud in the room and there was a lot of clapping involved. But so this happened in October, like was said, and that's when we passed, the regional government and the regional assembly voted for the decree that states the 30% marine protected areas of the Azores. And so this is the new Azores Marine Park, which will allow to protect 30% of the Azores sub-area of the Portuguese EEZ. 50% of it is fully protected, which is the dark orange. You can see a big orange, bump at the top, which has it is very important actually in biodiversity. And also we have smaller spots, which is actually the sea mountains. So it's smaller spots because it's the ones that are more impacted for fisheries. So that's why they were designated. The other ones, it doesn't mean that around those areas it isn't important, but if you were to fully protect it, we wouldn't have extractive activities. And the thing is that we wouldn't be impacting the bottom. And, and we do think, and we do believe, and science led us to that the spillover effect will be enough just with these areas. However, bear in mind, they are very huge areas still. So we're talking about almost 300,000 square kilometers. Okay. And so in this political act actually took the protection of the Azorean marine area from 4% that existed from 1982 to 30% nowadays. And this accounts for the protection of the Portuguese Sea for about that went for 4.5 to 19.1%, which actually put us also this Azorean effort put us in a good spot nationwide in order to accomplish the 2030 objectives. And so the implementation of this decree, it was actually a Christmas gift because it was actually published on the 24th of December last year. And so that gives us 9 months to make it effective and 12 months to come out with the management strategy. And then we have within 3 years, the management plans for the entire areas need to be in place. So it is an ongoing task, but we think it's on the good way. The challenging task was to make it legal and approved, and now we're working on that. And so to finish, it was a political decision, and like our president said, it's led by example. We have to act now, and no one was left behind, or that's what we want. No one be left behind. So that's it.
Thank you so much, Rui. Very interesting to hear this Atlantic viewpoint so close to where the things are happening. We remain a little bit off track, but it would be unfortunate not to have the participation of the audience. So I guess we can have one question from the audience, one particular that would be succinct and would approach the themes that were addressed. So I hand the floor to the audience, to anyone who would be interested in placing a question. Well, in that case, I would like to make a question, because probably more to you, Mr. President José Guerreiro, how do you see nature-based solutions vis-a-vis the traditional solutions, the traditional industry solutions, in terms of efficiency, in terms of costs, in terms of advantages and disadvantages? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Actually, we must understand one thing. Nature-based solutions take more time. It's somehow like biotechnology dedicated to health. We need more time to test, and the development of technologies are a little demanding for time. But the real challenge is how to make this time become added value. And so sometimes we invest too much money in quick solutions, and then we find that those quick solutions are not so sustainable as we thought to. And the shift is to invest in these long-term solutions that actually nature invested on that for millions of years, and they are just there. So we are now, and we told at the beginning that most of the financing comes from state funds or international funds. The real challenge is trying to demonstrate to the private sectors that this can be an asset. But also we must understand that governance and governments have a role, which are the mechanisms that we can develop to act as teasers for private sector to invest. Is it on taxation, for instance, advantages on blue taxation, as we did for Green Deals? And this is the question that we must ask ourselves. And I think we are at the moment that some private investors, although investing with risk capital, for instance, or business angels for private companies that are investing in these new solutions, should come to the court. And this is where we are. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I definitely got my answer. A round of applause for our speakers, please. This wraps up the second session, and we would move on to the third and final thematic session on greening maritime transport and emission control areas, ECAs. I would like to please invite to the stage Laurent Daniel, Head of Shipbuilding Unit at the OECD, Susana Salvador, of the Unit of Environmental Monitoring of the DGRM, and I believe that's it, please. And the first speaker on my list is Laurent Daniel, who I invite to please go to the podium. Thank you, sir.
Yes. Hello, everyone. I'm very happy to be here. Thank you very much for organizing this event. I think it's very interesting, very important. So I will talk about maritime decarbonization. I think it's not the only topic in this session, because we'll talk about emission control areas. Also, I will develop and explain more in detail what means the reduction of air pollution by ships, which is a goal of the International Maritime Organization Convention MARPOL 6, so MARPOL Annex 6, which is on the reduction of air pollution. So first, I will give you some elements on the shipbuilding committee. Very happy to have our chair, the Norwegian ambassador here, Alvor. Very happy to see you here. So we are an OECD committee established in 1966. So a very old committee, one of the oldest maybe. And our goal is to contribute to establishing normal competitive conditions in the global shipbuilding market. And for that, we try to increase transparency in the market. We do country peer reviews. We each year update an inventory of support measures, and we do some dedicated studies on supply, demand, price, cost, etc., to better understand the market. Our mandate has been renewed late 2023 for the period 24-28, again with focus on establishing normal competitive conditions and also with an emphasis on decarbonization. Yes, just to kick off my presentation with like this chart, which is the main message is to see that you have an increase of the share in the order book of ships capable of using alternative fuels, basically low carbon fuels, but about 50% of the order book, but only 7% are currently operating. So there is a long way to have a, like I can say, a fleet which is like decarbonized. And how to decarbonize the sector? So first, we can see that the maritime sector is very, like, there are several parts. So on this chart, I don't know if Emily is here, but she prepared kindly this chart, and it shows that the various parts of some parts of the maritime sector. You see shipping, you see shipbuilding, you see ports, and all these parts have to work together to decarbonize maritime transport. So on the shipping side, you see that there is like a big, very important GHG strategy established by the International Maritime Organization, and the goal is to reach net zero emission by ships in 2050. And before that, there will be a reduction of carbon intensity of the ships through further improvement of the energy efficiency for new and existing ships. And to reach net zero, there should be this uptake of zero or near zero GHG technology, which allow to have this zero carbon ship operating. So on the shipbuilding side, it's necessary to design and build and retrofit ships so that we have these zero carbon ships capable to operate on the seas. In terms of the role of ports, ports have to develop bunkering infrastructure to be able to distribute these low emission fuels. And this is a very big challenge with a lot of like investment also onshore, which are as big as the investment for ships themselves. So I will shift now to my next slide. So now, as you can see on the chart with many like technologies mentioned, there is no one size fits all solution to replace carbon intensive fuels in shipping. The sector is increasingly looking to fuel optionality and diversification of fuel types, with LNG and methanol making up most of the alternative fuel order book. But key challenges remain. So onboard technology development, especially for new technologies such as onboard carbon capture and storage, are still at early stage. And the cost efficiency of fuel and fuel supply and bunkering at ports are still like not at a real, like can say, advanced level. So ships are only as green as the fuel they run on, and all these ships in the order book are just capable to use low carbon ships. But in many cases, they are really still using fossil fuels. And as I said, so the supply of alternative fuels is also a challenge. And in terms of regulatory framework, I've mentioned the IMO GHG strategy 2023, but it's just setting a goal. And to like reinforce it and have like incentives, there should be like some additional measures, what we call the midterm measures, which is now the IMO net zero framework, which would be based on a marine fuel standard and possibly a carbon levy. But it's still under discussion at the IMO Marine Environment Protection Committee. So just, I think it was last week, there was an intersessional working group on GHG at the IMO, which discussed on that, and there are still, even if there is like a slow convergence between members, there are still divergences too, notably on the carbon levy. And you can see on the slide also all the various energy saving technologies. So you see it's very like broad, and often we see like it's a mix of all these technologies that are implemented by ship owners, depending on cost. And we see that, for instance, for low carbon ships like methanol or ammonia, their cost is often 3 to 4 times higher than fossil fuels. Before that, I would like also to mention also the work of the Shipbuilding Committee and one of our subgroup, which is called the informal expert group on export credit for ships, in which we try to propose possible more liberal rules for the export credits for low carbon ships. So it's also a concrete role that the OECD can play to give additional incentives to support these low carbon ships. Now, in terms of port infrastructure, you can see that the various level of, or can say share of ports, which are involved in the various initiatives, so bunkering infrastructure or regulations or vessel activities to support this transition to net zero in shipping. But you see it's still below 50%, but it's growing. We have a lot, as I said, a lot of uncertainty in terms of the future like technologies to be implemented. So, and also elements or maybe various policy initiatives that are taken at the same time. So I can notably mention the GHG strategy by the IMO. At the EU level, there is an inclusion of shipping in the EU emission trading scheme and the Fuel EU Maritime, which are also playing a role for ships that are in EU waters. There are green corridors to promote the use of low carbon ships between 2 ports. And I think we will hear from our colleague from Portugal about the important role played by emission control areas for SOx and NOx, so which are very important and can and even if the IMO made progress to like regulate and reduce the level of SOx and NOx, there are still a lot of possibilities to go further thanks to ECAs. So in terms of key takeaways, so I will summarize. This is my last slide. I don't know if I was too long, but the maritime sector is shifting towards low and zero emission solutions. So 50%, 52% of order tonnage is capable of using alternative fuels. There is an increased uptake of energy saving technologies, now 29% of the fleet, and of digital solutions, which often go together with decarbonization. So now we have uneven progress, and it's really interesting to see as fast movers versus the rest of the fleet, what is the best maybe strategy for ship owners, not easy. There are also a big uncertainty over long-term fuel solutions. When we discuss with shipbuilding companies, we hear them that it's very difficult to know what would be the best solution on the short, medium, and long term. And it involves a lot, very big investment. And in terms of policy ambitions, so there is this big effort at the IMO. It's really interesting to see that Portugal will submit its proposal for the next Marine Environment Protection Committee on ECA, and also there is this ongoing discussion on the midterm measures to support decarbonization, and also some regional and national initiatives, including also the role of emission control areas. So I think I stop here. And thank you very much for your attention, and looking forward to hearing you also on ECS. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Laurent. C'était très intéressant. And right now, I would like to pass the floor to Susana Salvador, who will speak to us about ECAs. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you. And I'm very grateful for having been given the honor to participate and provide an example of what has been done and what are the efforts that are joint efforts put on by Portugal together with other countries, so that we have in the short term, relatively short term, a conclusion regarding the proposal that has been submitted with regard to the emission control area in the Northeast Atlantic. So without further ado, I'll just enter into the not that much level of detail, because as my colleague just said, this is a discussion that will be reserved for the next session of the MEPC in April, and hopefully everything will run well. So in order to be adopted in October still this year, so that it could enter into force 2027 or 2028. So in brief terms, our scope of responsibility, you have heard about what is the huge role of the DGRM and Portuguese administration with regard to responsibility with regard to the protection of the oceans and the natural resources, and also in terms of making the bridge with the different policies and with the different organizations, because as we know, there is a patchwork of institutions at a global level, and I will focus on the role of the International Maritime Organization with regard to the ECA adoption, but also with regard to the regional marine conventions, such as OSPAR Commission, which has also a very important role to play in terms of addressing the pollution aspects, and the EU maritime policies, and you just referred to the EU fuel, which is very important, and the Fit for 55, which is a huge objective that needs to be attained not that far in the future. So there is, sorry, just move on to the problem. There is a problem, and I should focus on what is that we should address at present. And it is a common problem to solve because, of course, marine areas are connected and there are no frontiers in terms of ocean pollution and in terms of ocean health. So what is the problem at stake is that we need to take action in how to reduce these emissions of pollutants in the area at stake. The shipping traffic is one of the sources of this problem. So 88% of the traffic in this proposed area covers and also across other established emission control areas. And that's the issue. So at the present, the problem is that the area proposed is not covered, is unprotected. So this is not that innovative. This is just linking the areas, as you can see, in the middle of the Atlantic and the northeastern part, which are not protected, as opposed to the other regions that have already ECAs that have been approved, either for sulfur content in fuel composition or for nitrogen oxides. And that's the reason why we are making this proposal. We propose this already, have been discussing this, which is based on a study by the International Council on Clean Transportation and also by the University of Oporto. So concentrating on what is the aim of this reduction in the sulfur oxide and NOx content in fuel, there are these conclusions from the recently published MTER report, and in sum, what is said is that the regions that are covered already by SECAs or NECAs or ECAs in general, there have been observed huge reduction of pollutants, and the increase is still expected to continue if no action is taken in the unprotected area. So that's the why. So this is the conclusions with regard to sulfur. This is the conclusion with regard to nitrogen oxides. And so we think, and we are convinced actually, then in less than 10 years, 33% increase in the Atlantic was observed, but a decrease was verified where there are already ECAs established. Also, we are talking about particulate matter. I don't think, okay, I'm seeing it from here, which also play concerning impact in terms of black carbon emissions. And the air pollution from maritime traffic are, of course, dense, and they are mainly caused by these 5 types of ships. And the density in the North Atlantic is, as we know, very high, as is the population density. We are talking of about 200 million people in the region covered by the proposed zone, and in the coastal areas, of course. And consider these impacts of ship emissions and on the environment, on the natural resources and the health of populations. The study is based, of course, on a cost-effective analysis, but not just so, also in terms of what would be the health impacts and how many lives would be saved up until 2030, and then in the 20 following years. So driving climate action in shipping is one of the objectives of the IMO, and we are exactly talking about that. We are talking about how we could approach the solution, but at a global level, because we know, as I said, that patchwork is working well because national policies as well as regional policies taken at the level of regional marine convention can help, providing the tools and helping with working together with the involved stakeholders to find the most balanced solutions. So to have also a view in terms of the impact that their businesses will have in that regard. So a new emission control area in the Northeast Atlantic would be a contribution to the problem. And how would that be done? What is an emission control zone? As you very well know, this is covered by the MARPOL Convention, the Annex 6, which provides the criteria and the requirements in terms of assessments and in terms of the action that is needed to designate new areas. In these areas, there are sulfur oxide and nitrogen oxide limitations. So there are caps while prohibiting deliberate emissions, of course, of ozone-depleting substances, but designated emission control areas set stringent standards for these pollutants. What happens if we don't? This is Annex 6, so as you can see, IMO has, the MARPOL Convention has several annexes covering different aspects of shipping and pollution-related issues. And without an Atlantic or a Northeast Atlantic, a new emission control area, what would be our lives? It would just run as usually, which means that there would be still an unbalance and a discriminatory situation with regard to the area at stake, because as I said, it's the only area that remains to be protected at this level in terms of having limited standards that provide the same level playing field for all industries and all the countries around the Atlantic Ocean. So if a new ECA is agreed, there are benefits that would be manifold. So just as we saw, the sulfur oxide emissions would be limited because, of course, the content should be lower than 0.1%, and consequently the particulate emissions as well would be lower due to the use of fuel with lower sulfur content, and the decrease of nitrogen oxide emissions because, of course, engines classified more recent engines are more efficient and would emit lower NOx emissions or will be retrofitted. So the reductions of pollutants emitted from shippings, and this is the new area of the ECA, if it will be agreed. So you have different areas. The orange ones are the recent ones that have been adopted by IMO. And we have also the Mediterranean. So the proposed area would connect all the area, the northern part, the Arctic, which is, as we know, very sensitive area, and down to Portugal. So if, as I said, this will be agreed, there will be a huge impact in terms, according to the study, which formed the basis for the proposal, there would be huge impacts in terms of the economies of the countries, but also and mainly the reductions of the pollutants would impact in the health of the populations that are at stake. So to ensure fair competition, of course, the intention would be that this would be globally accepted so that all the almost all the northern part of the Atlantic would be covered by the same standards, by the same rules, so that to ensure that industries have the possibility to adapt, to the obligations of reducing pollution, but also in a fair and equitable competition, so to say, approach. So that's the idea. And of course, I will not tell more because this is a discussion that still needs to go on in the appropriate level and technical groups in the IMO, but hopefully we will move forward very, very fastly and have the results also in the near future. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Susanna. Look forward for the near future then. For fear of lagging off a little bit behind schedule more than just a few minutes. I mean, I think we have some time, but not too much. So I guess we can do like we did in session 2 and say accept 1 question or 2 questions maximum for the speakers. So I would now hand the floor over to you and for those who would like to place a question to the speakers. No brave souls? There is, could you please pass the microphones to the lady? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mariette van Empel, I'm a counselor for transport and environment at the Embassy of the Netherlands here in Paris. Thank you very much for both of the presentations, very interesting. I just had a question about the measures you mentioned to do for decarbonizing the maritime transport. Do you see in those measures that you have mentioned that there are different kind of effects or results which might be more effective or less effective? For example, I saw a reduction of the speed, which I think is really very important for the emissions and also very important for ECAs in the near future.
Thank you very much. I don't know if it's work. I think it's a very good question. I think we have assessment. I think Emily is here in the room, so we hope to publish a report in the coming weeks after the formatting process with like some elements, notably on the potential effect in terms of reduction of CO2 emissions with the implementation of selected energy saving technology, including speed reduction. You're right, it's a very powerful way of reducing emissions. So I don't have in mind the figures, but I confirm that it's super powerful in terms of because emissions, energy intensity is proportional of the square of the speed. So reduction of the speed by X leads to a reduction of emission by X square. So it's powerful. Yes.
Please.
If I may just add something, I mean, there are different tools at the level of the IMO, and one of the other tool that we didn't, entered into is the particularly sensitive sea areas. And just to recall that in the Mediterranean Sea, for instance, where ECA already exists, there is also a PSSA recently adopted by IMO that recommends exactly the reduction of the speed of the vessels between 10 to 13 knots, exactly in order to reduce the input of CO2 into the atmosphere, while also reducing the level of noise that impact on groups of species. And we are mainly talking about marine mammals. So it's complementary. It's different tools aimed at different objectives, but they are complementary, and they both contribute to the reduction of the pollution that is emitted. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We don't have time for more questions, unfortunately. So I would suggest to wrap up the third session, and a big round of applause for our speakers, please. Thank you so much. We are now coming to an end, and my moderating duties are also coming to an end. So I'd like to thank everyone who found time to take part of this session, both, of course, you, the audience, the good people of the OECD, and all of the Portuguese representatives in the room. So without further ado, I would invite to the stage for the closing remarks the Director of Environment, Joe Tyndall, the Director of Science, Technology and Innovation, Jerry Sheehan, and Ambassador Manuel Antunes. Through this order, I would please ask for Joe to present your closing remarks to the podium. Thank you so much.
Oh, Pedro, thank you very much. And just to kick things off for this closing session, of course, I want to extend my sincere gratitude to all the speakers in the three sessions we had today, and Pedro, for your wonderful moderating job. I think it's been really a fascinating discussion that really has, I guess if I go quickly through the three sessions, the first one framed it up really well with an overview of how the ocean economy contributes to Portugal's sustainable socioeconomic development. And I thought it was really useful to understand the three dimensions of the nexus we've been talking about between the ocean economy and climate change. We've got the ocean supporting millions of livelihoods, but at the same time playing an important role in climate regulation. And the third dimension, unfortunately, is how climate change is threatening marine ecosystems in various different ways. The highlight has been the need to come up with coordinated action with policy coherence. This is a bit of a theme, I think, through a lot of the work the OEC does. Policy coherence across economic, environmental, and social dimensions. Then in the second session, I was particularly interested in the nature-based solutions. Wonderful images of Gorgonian and bubblegum corals, fascinating. And some sound bites I took out, going from nature conservation to nature restoration, going from fishing the sea to farming the sea, and another important message about working with nature rather than working against nature. And we know now that mangroves, salt marshes, seagrasses not only protect those coastal communities from extreme weather, but also are really strong and powerful carbon sinks. I saw this very directly when I went to the Gambia a few years ago, where the minister took us down to a coastal area. There were these frankly rather ugly, huge concrete structures that were designed to stop coastal erosion were an epic failure. It was most unfortunate, a substantial investment. So we know that reversing biodiversity loss, strengthening ocean resilience needs expanded marine protected areas. So it was really interesting to hear about that. And then finally, the last session focusing on greening maritime transport, that I think it was quite telling that while good progress is being made with over 50% of new ship orders capable of using alternative fuels, at the moment only 7% of the global fleet currently operates with those technologies. So there's a hell of a long way to go to get to net zero by 2050. So I think that today's discussions have really helped to reinforce the importance of integrated policies for ocean and climate. I know that Jerry is going to elaborate a little bit when he speaks shortly about where the OECD work is going to take it from here, because there is clearly a lot more work to do. So thanks everyone for your participation from the point of view of the Environment Directorate here. Look forward to our continued collaboration with Portugal. This has been a really important and inspiring event. So thank you all very much indeed.
Thank you very much, Joe. Excellent finishing. Jerry, I would invite you next to the podium to please present your closing remarks. Thank you.
Very good. Well, good afternoon. I'm also really delighted to have this opportunity to offer a few closing remarks after what's been a very enjoyable afternoon, enjoyable and informative in so many ways. I also, I think, should start by giving some thanks as well. And I'll start by giving thanks to Portugal for organizing this event with us, to the State Secretary, the Ambassador, all of the high-level representatives that we had here today, and all of the experts who shared with us such keen insight into developments in Portugal around this nexus of the ocean economy and climate. I will also thank my colleague, Joe Tyndall from the Environment Directorate, who co-organized with us today's event, with whom we have had very, very good collaboration on these and other related issues at the intersection, the nexus, maybe we could say, between science, technology, and innovation, my directorate, and the environment. So very happy to do this with you today. And of course, I want to thank all of the speakers, all of you in the audience, many of my colleagues here, other ambassadors who came and joined us today as well, for adding and contributing to the discussions today. I will not attempt to summarize, as Joe Tyndall so well did, the discussions today, but other than to say, I also noticed a lot of good science, technology, and innovation on display, in addition to policy coherence and social policy and others. I noted the bubblegum coral as well, right, as a good piece of our science and our ecosystems that we want to preserve. And those drifting cameras and buoys, again, great technology that have given us great insight into what lies at the ocean depths, and a lot of other great technology that's being deployed to help us understand both the oceans and the climate and how the two intersect. So I think with additional innovation, the third part of my portfolio, I think we can continue to make very good progress on improving the health and the sustainability of our oceans and of the climate. What I would like to do is just take a moment to highlight a few of the other issues and some of the work that we at OECD are carrying on around the ocean economy and around some of the climate issues that are associated with it, recognizing, of course, that the ocean is an emerging priority, certainly at the national level, as we've seen today on great display in Portugal, as well as globally, as we've seen in some of the presentations that have been made at the European level and even more globally. I will highlight for you first some of the work that we are doing on the ocean economy. And you saw from my colleague, Claire Joly, the work, and I'll call to your attention, the work that she presented on the ocean economy to 2050, a report that we hope to issue by the end of next month already in the run-up to the UN Ocean Conference, Third Ocean Conference, and will provide detailed economic information on more than 140 countries, 20 plus different sectors that contribute to the ocean economy. And I think that will give us, again, great insight, as she shared with you, into the size of the ocean economy. We're at 3.4% of global GDP, 133 million plus full-time equivalent jobs around the world. And as Claire noted, 3.4% doesn't always sound like a big number, but when you put it in aggregate, it would be, right, the fifth largest economy. So our ocean economy is important. It has been growing over time. We would like to see it sustain and grow grow in sustainable ways. I also want to say that you've seen, I think, also on display today, some of the work that we are doing around sustainability with a focus on plastic pollution, on the circular economy, on biodiversity as well. There's also work, including much work that goes on in my colleague Joe Tyndall's director on the environment, on climate adaptation challenges, some of which looks at coastal adaptation challenges related to rising seas. Beyond what you saw today and other work going on across the OECD, there's work on fisheries and how we improve the strength of fisheries. Again, I think this is moving from fishing in many cases to farming. Also financing mechanisms for sustainable ocean development. And thirdly, the very critical connections between freshwater and ocean sustainability, not just at the national, but also at the sub-national level. We have at OECD, as you've seen a bit on display here today, a diverse ocean team that draws from many different directorates, draws on the work of many different committees across the OECD. And we have been joining forces on a lot of the work that you've seen and on our preparations for UNOC 3 set to take place in a few months in Nice. And in the lead up to that event itself, we will be publishing several major reports, including the Ocean Economy Report. And we also anticipate engaging at the conference and in a number of pre-conference events. So I think as we move toward the third UN Ocean Conference and beyond, we welcome further collaboration with member countries, Portugal and others represented here as well, and other stakeholders to help us achieve meaningful results. It will take scientists, technologists, engineers, innovators, policymakers, environmentalists, and more to help us improve the ocean economy and its connection to climate. So please stay tuned to OECD and our work. You can look at our Oceans web portal for more insight into the work that we have going on and continue to work with us and collaborate with us as we move forward on this important topic. So thank you again for joining us today. And again, I'm delighted to be able to contribute to today's event.
Thank you so much, Jerry, for your words and your contribution, as well as to Joe Tyndall. And now, lastly, but certainly not leastly, Ambassador Lobantunes to bring us home.
So, good afternoon, everybody. Obviously, the most important things have already been told by our participants. To me, on behalf of the Portuguese delegation to the OECD, words of thanks. First of all, to the Secretary of State for Maritime Affairs for being here with us and for supporting us and stimulating this initiative. Of course, also our colleagues from the OECD, Jerry and Joe, their contribution was absolutely valuable, and of their teams on which we found support since the beginning. My compatriots who came from Portugal to participate and enrich this debate, thank you for coming and for supporting us. And also, last but not the least, Pedro. Pedro was the one who had the idea of organizing this event, an enthusiast on maritime affairs. He proposed me, I said, okay, go ahead. And he was since the beginning the engine and the soul of this initiative, and I thank him for this. What I think is perhaps, of course, technically, it was already made a summary what was debated here and discussed here. But besides that, what I think it's really important in things like this one, in events like this is to call the attention of people to the wide range of issues, of problems, of challenges that the sea reality confront us. I think that most of the time we think about the sea as, of course, fishing and the fish, but perhaps more than that, the summer, the nice days and the sunshine and diving on the sea, and things lie like that for some time or most of the time. But beyond that very pleasant reality, there are indeed challenges which have a direct impact in our lives, in our economy, in our atmosphere, in everything that has to do with Earth and human survival and human well-being. I think this awareness or the need to make people aware of this very complex reality is very important. There will not be a healthy Earth without we taking care of the sea. Portugal, as also mentioned here, has a special relationship with the sea. We are in some way, our history is in some way the history of our relationship with the sea since the beginning, and will continue like that for the future, because it's a reality to which we are absolutely tied. The two great Portuguese poets, one from the 16th century and another one from the 20th century, their most important poems are about the sea. In the sea, or have to do with sea. In the 16th century, Luís de Camões, his most important poetry is called Lusíadas, and is the story of our maritime adventure to India, from Portugal till India. And the 20th century, Fernando Pessoa, most of his poetry has to do with the Portuguese soul, the Portuguese way of being, how influence has been by the sea and by our relationship with the sea. One of his most known poetries says this: "See, how much of your salt are tears from Portugal." This means indeed, or express indeed, how it's more than a factual reality. It has something of spiritual that comes from the deep of our souls. Thank you very much for being with us, and I hope we will continue to cooperate with the OECD in the future in developing studies and cooperation in most of these areas we have talked about this afternoon. Thank you.
So just to wrap things on, I wish everyone a wonderful afternoon, and thank you so much for taking part of this event. Thank you.